Um, the experience of my former husband, Robert, as well as the experiences I've seen happening with other people. I've told you a bit about the circumstance where he is in danger of losing his property and the facts surrounding that, and just basically what I see as a general injustice in many cases.
Now, all of this began from a piece of your property being, in essence, given to someone that it had no right to belong to.
That is correct. Unbeknown to us in 1999, there was a conveyance of the property to the north here, property known as Hillcrest. That included or purported to include an approximately 3,000 square foot area of what was Moulder property. We did not know this. In reality, the deed was void as it relates to our land. It conveyed the cottage, which was legitimately conveyed, but it did not actually convey ownership or any rights over any part of our land. We have an abundance of evidence to support that
And we have a judgment as well.
all parties to that deed knew that our land should not have been included, but we've been suffering from the effects of that.
Now, this house has been in the Moulder family since 1900.
Yes.
All the property here, it's about 1.6 acres. That was in Robert's family. Originally, what was your great, I believe, grandfather, a gentleman by the name of George Henry Curtis, purchased this property in 1900, and it's been in Robert's family since that time. He inherited only a very, very small share, and we purchased the remaining interest. The property had become fractured in its ownership
Right. It's been
in
buying
various
it out
estates.
since 1992.
So we had these plans. We'd basically put our eggs into this basket, and we had development plans for this property.
For our kids.
All of that was brought to, I suppose the word ruin is not too strong a word, when in 2004 our neighbors to the north filed an injunction by filing a writ against Robert, claiming that they owned the land.
Knowing that
After
they didn't.
over 3 years of litigation, we recovered the land. It was found that they did not have and never did have any rights or ownership of our land. But basically by then, the damage had been done and had been set in trail, and our development plans just fell apart.
Yeah, they froze our
As one
mortgage,
can
they
imagine.
froze planning. They did everything they could to stop us dead in our tracks.
Now, why is that, do you think? If the property was,
Greed.
it's yours.
Greed.
Well,
And they think they can get away with it.
people tend to do things that they think they can get away with. I cannot speak for the reasons. Oh, I do know that there seems to have been some sort of friendship between the conveyancing lawyer and these purchasers. I don't know whether I should name these people or not. But, well, Paul and Janet Slaughter.
And Stephen Cook. the
Stephen
lawyer.
Cook was the
Cox
lawyer
Allen
who was
Wilkinson.
then a partner, some form of partner. I believe the term is salary partner at Cox Allen Wilkinson. This conveyance took place in 1999, but was concealed from us. In fact, what is very interesting is that in 1999 and 2003 and early 2004, Stephen Cook was actually negotiating with us because we had agreed to sell the Slaughters a small strip of land.
Of
We
that
couldn't
same
sell
land.
them the entirety. And
So how can he believe he owned it?
after a long period of time, Paul Slaughter suddenly says, I'm not paying you anything. We already own this. And we then discovered that our land had been included. But I'm careful to explain that the land never really was transferred at all. We have an abundance of evidence. Anybody is welcome to come and sit on my porch and look through my files. Anyone who looks at our evidence is shocked to see that none of this was an accident. It was all very deliberate. We have evidence that the seller, Michael Cranfield, the purported seller, never owned our land. He knew he didn't own our land. The sales agreement actually says he cannot give good legal title. The initial
That
draft,
was withheld for years.
the initial draft sales agreement did not include our land at all. So, that's evident that when he was marketing it for sale, it wasn't included. But somehow our land was included in this transaction, and that's armed the Slaughters to do what they did.
And there's an abundance of evidence to show that Mr. Cook could never even arrive at that conclusion, let alone draw a conveyance.
Now, Mr. Moulder, no stranger somewhat to the media, because you've been fighting a very vigorous battle for years for the cottage here. Now, how did it go from a property dispute to your north to now losing your cottage?
Well, the legal fraternity doesn't want to pay out whether they're wrong or right. Wrong in specific. We have proven that they were wrong. We've proven that their documents were always void. And we are baffled by the fact that this void document has been able to continue to travel through the courts, and then we got billed for their legal fees by being wrongfully struck out. Clearly, persons who operate without a lawyer in these courts haven't got a chance because they are ignored. The evidence is ignored. There's a certain amount of blamability that can easily be proven against these judgments. And I'll stop there.
If I can just expand on that. When the Slaughters filed an injunction and started a claim against Robert in 2004, that went on for over 3 years, by the end of which we recovered the land. By the end of that case, it became very obvious that this was not an accident. When the Slaughters started their claim in 2004, they portrayed themselves as innocent purchasers, that they had purchased the land, that they had the highest form of title, and that suddenly this man next door is, making a false claim. We found out that that was not true, that they actually had an abundance of knowledge to know that they were not actually buying the land at all. We suffered incredible financial damage amongst other damages due to that claim. If you can imagine, the area of land was crucial to our development plans. We couldn't obtain financing, we couldn't develop, there were all sorts of things, and everything just fell apart. Due to the Slaughters' claim. We suffered damage from that point, and there were ongoing damages from there. As a result of that, in 2010, Robert filed a claim against Cox Hallett Wilkinson, Stephen Cook, Michael Cranfield, the purported seller, and Paul and Janet Slaughter, the purported buyers, alleging fraud, amongst other things, and seeking compensation for this. That claim was, we say, wrongfully thrown out.
Absolutely, wrongfully chucked out.
We are hoping to overturn that. There are a couple of applications that are going to be submitted, hopefully very shortly in that regard. But at this point in time, due to the fact that his claim was wrongfully struck out, they were all awarded costs against him, and they are actively pursuing those costs.
By selling my house.
The ringleaders in that are Cox Hallett Wilkinson,
Mr.
so the very law firm that were the authors of this deed of conveyance, and who I, to a large degree, hold responsible for all of this, are actively trying to sell his property to recover what they call the fruits of their victory over him. So that is where we stand at this time.
So now they're committing 2 frauds on me. One, to take the land in the first place, and then to get a judgment against me to take my house, to wipe me out.
Robert was already once evicted in January 2013.
Wrongfully.
That turned out to be wrongful. A judgment creditor under law, it has been determined by a subsequent judgment of Judge Stephen Hellman, is that the judgment creditors have no right to evict.
And he wrongfully evicted me.
A judgment debtor.
At what point do you, or when do you give up? Will you give up?
We will not give up. We do not have a choice.
They threw us in a poker game and told us we're all in. We never wanted to play.
Some people have said to us, well, someone has said to me, well, why doesn't Robert just try and get a mortgage and pay these people? I mean, that is ludicrous.
A mortgage in a recession.
Here it is.
You can't get any money.
I don't know. I may be speaking out of turn, but if Bobby was a billionaire, I don't think he would pay them.
Never paid anyhow.
Can you imagine? We were minding our own business. The transaction from Cranfield to Slaughter should have been something that had nothing to do with us. Our land was wrongfully included. We were dragged through the courts. Our lives were disrupted. Our 3 children have had to grow to manhood with this hanging over our heads. Robert was simply trying to protect his land. We never even recovered the costs from our initial hearing, and there's a whole nother story from that.
It's another
He took the action, which I think anyone would have done, to try and seek and recover his compensation. That claim, as I said, was thrown out, struck out. The judge, the now deceased Richard Ground, he actually months later gave leave to appeal.
Which proved that he was first
I
judgment
have
was wrong.
Judge Ground on record, the official court recording, saying that there are issues that need to be ventilated.
And yet
that
the
he
appeals court
sees
ignored it.
things. Unfortunately, we went before the Court of Appeal. They kept us to a very narrow point and limitation point. I've had a number of lawyers off the record will tell us that we were
It was wrong.
in this. So here we have it. The judge who struck out Bobby's claim gave us leave to appeal, said that he sees something. Where is the justice? We are now left, because it had to go to the Court of Appeal. There are many things that I could say about the Court of Appeal as it existed at that time under the former president, Judge Zaka. I have appeared before that court 4 times in total. None of them have been pleasant experiences. They've all been extremely unpleasant, I have to say, needlessly so. I believe
Worse
that
than
as a
unpleasant.
litigant
You're
in
so
person,
kind.
as a litigant in person appearing before many of our Bermuda courts, we are not treated without fear or favor, which is a judicial oath. We are not treated in that manner.
Not to mention that they're too old to be sitting on the
We
bench.
were basically not listened to. We were confined to a very,
never
very
read our
narrow
documents.
point, and we were not given the justice.
Mr. Ward keep falling asleep
that
as well.
we should have been given. So that's a scenario. How far will we go? I will not stand by. I have assisted Robert throughout and will continue to do so. I will not stand by and let him be left homeless due to the acts of others. And it would be bad enough if this was all a mistake. Things happen. No one is perfect. But none of this had to happen.
Mr. Cook knew that he was breaking the law when he wrote that conveyance.
The interesting thing is also, we had offered to sell them a strip of land, not the whole thing because it was
And
crucial
give
to
them
the
the
development.
right of way.
But we had offered to sell them a 10-foot strip of land to enhance their backyard. We had offered to throw in a right of way, which has value.
And they decided
for
to take it
nothing.
exclusively for their own use,
So again,
knowing
Robert,
that they never had the right.
He has been slandered in this as well, and that's another thing that I find very, very upsetting. He has never been the aggressor
Oh,
in
Mr.
this.
Harshall's accused me of a heroin man.
Some people have
In court.
Some people have said, well, you recovered your land. You should be happy. Move on. We cannot move on.
Not with the debts hanging over
When
us.
people deliberately do things to injure and refuse to be held accountable, we have no option but to fight, not only for us but for our sons, for our future. And what is concerning here is not only us but the other Bermudians who may be similarly affected. I've heard of numerous cases of injustice.
The thing is, they
So
never thought that we were going to make it this far.
We hope that by speaking out, sharing our story, it will encourage others to similarly do the same. And I would like to also add that many of us are familiar with and have heard about the history of land theft, land fraud, various irregular dealings of injustice throughout history decades ago, or perhaps centuries as well. But
it's never
I would
stopped.
like to say that this is an example of modern day, because it did not have to happen. These were deliberate acts. And
It's
as I
involved
said,
every large law
our
firm.
case thus far has never been heard. The evidence has never been presented to the court.
The evidence is insurmountable.
In the form of an actual case, but I invite anyone to question me, to ask to see documents. I would like to also say this. Cox Hallett Wilkinson, of all of the parties, I hold them most responsible. It's difficult to see who is most responsible, but as the professionals, as the law firm, they did the deed and are refusing to be held accountable, are now actively trying to sell this man's home to pay themselves.
But they're all working in unison. They're all prepared to keep the lie going in unison.
So,
Mr. Moulder, that's a very strong allegation.
Facts are clear. The facts we have are absolutely clear. Anybody in Bermuda reading these will know without a shadow of a doubt. That's how clear it is. We've already have a confession by Mr. Cranfield himself.
I would like to also add, just to share a couple of the pieces of evidence that we have. Paul Slaughter, the purported buyer, swore an affidavit in May 2010. And in one section, he says, Cox Hallett Wilkinson were not prepared to give an assurance of good title, but told us that a challenge was unlikely.
Now, see how ridiculous that statement is? Because Cox Hallett Wilkinson can't get a mortgage without assuring good title. And how could they ever believe that a person's land wouldn't be challenged? You try to steal somebody's land, they have a right to challenge it.
So with that statement,
It's intellectually dishonest.
It is, when I read that, I almost could not believe my eyes for a law firm. Now, I did not hear that myself, but Paul Slaughter has sworn that that's what he was told. And the facts support that. So we are saying that simultaneously, according to Paul Slaughter, Cox Hallett Wilkinson told them they could not assure good title, but yet they
Secured a
aided
mortgage.
them in obtaining a mortgage. They
Which
drew up the
means you
mortgage
have to
deed,
say you have a good title.
which exactly they
And
would
we've
have
already
had to have
proved
had
in
good
court
title.
that there was no good
And
title.
in addition, Carla, I can show you whenever any property changes hands in Bermuda, what is called a land transfer notice has to be filed. I have a certified copy of that land transfer notice where Stephen Cook signs off saying that our land was conveyed in fee simple. So he purported to convey ownership. So here we have it where there was ample evidence to show that Cox Hallett Wilkinson knew that our land should not have been included, but yet it was.
And one final question. I mean, you've called a number of names and major law firms. Do these people now just ignore you, or have they
Absolutely.
responded?
Many chances they can.
Well,
we've written to them, but we've got very little response.
I wrote most recently to, I believe it's Ernest Morrison, who is the managing director of Cox Hallett Wilkinson a few months back. I got no response whatsoever.
It's typical.
They're
all
it.
Complicit.
As I mentioned, the word fruits. They see that they have recovered, they have gained a victory, they've won.
Yeah,
they're
about
entitled
to take
the
my
fruits
house.
of their labor.
Why? They don't need to go any further. They're happy. The progress is for them.
I can show you their legal arguments where they basically say that their duty was to their client, the Slaughters. They didn't have any duty not to convey our land.
Our land. They didn't have a duty to convey our land.
I think that's a ridiculous statement.
It's another statement of intellectual dishonesty. They are quite arrogant to stand there and tell you exactly what you know.
So I think if that's
but
their
it means
position,
has no probative value.
I think that the Bermuda public needs to be aware of that.
We have to tell. We have to tell our story.
Now, one last question, and this is to Mr. Moulder. Understandably, you're very upset.
Absolutely.
Or very.
They've destroyed our lives.
And so, are you not afraid that by you going public yet again could have even dire ramifications?
Well, figure this out. If they take my house, they wipe me out. What have I got to lose?